Fuck it. XQC watched it, I'll watch it. I actually really like the DB Cooper story. And I haven't seen this one yet. Thanks for resub Rick in the Prime, Gregory, and Mustard.
A daring parachute escape from a flying
Mustard.
727 somewhere between Reno.
A search was made of the plane immediately.
We don't know who he was, where he came from, or where he went. I expect that we'll keep looking until we
Arsenal.
find him or find out what happened.
I love the idea that a YouTuber, like, actually solves one of these things. I'm assuming he doesn't, right? But maybe he does, I don't know.
In the afternoon of November the 24th, 1971, a middle-aged man carrying a briefcase walked into Portland International Airport and purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle, Washington.
Different place, Hyper.
The man identified himself as Dan Cooper, and along with 36 other passengers and a crew of 6, he soon boarded Northwest Airlines Flight 305. Once aboard, Cooper made himself comfortable in the middle of the last row of seats on the right side of the cabin. He ordered a drink and had a smoke, because this was the 70s. Once the flight was cleared for departure, Cooper turned around and handed an envelope to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. Inside the envelope was a note featuring a handwritten message stating he had a bomb. Schaffner reluctantly sat down beside him and glimpsed what appeared to be
Christ,
8
this story's
sticks of
so
dynamite
fucking wild.
inside his briefcase. Cooper's demands were quite simple. He wanted $200,000 in cash
Joe.
and 4 parachutes.
Thank
He
you,
also
Bear.
demanded a fuel truck to stand ready to refuel the aircraft once they landed in Seattle. Should they fail to comply with his demands, he threatened to, quote, do the job. Once the flight was airborne, Schaffner went to inform the cockpit crew, while another
This was in
flight
like the
attendant by the name of
60s, so
Tina Mucklow
200K
remained
back
by
then was
Cooper's
nuts.
side. By using a telephone in the rear of the cabin, Mucklow acted as an intermediary between Cooper and the rest of the flight crew.
They're
for the
70s,
remainder
whatever.
of the
Still a
hijack.
ton.
For the next hour and a half, Flight 305 maintained a holding pattern near Seattle, while local and federal authorities scrambled to procure the ransom as well as the 4 parachutes. 10,000 $20 bills were collected from a local bank, while the
Thanks,
owner of
Risa,
a nearby
Daddy.
skydiving school supplied the chutes. At
Yeah, I've seen it.
5:45
Park's
p.m.,
good.
more than 2 hours past its scheduled arrival, Flight 305 finally touched down in Seattle. By this point, it was well after sunset, and the aircraft was brought to a remote section of the tarmac. Once the flight came to a stop, both the ransom and the parachutes were handed over to Mucklow, who then brought them back aboard. In exchange,
How many people
Cooper
were on
permitted
board the
2 of
plane?
the flight attendants, as well as all the passengers, to disembark, many of whom had not yet realized the flight had been hijacked.
36?
With the
60?
ransom paid and only 4
36,
crew
okay.
members remaining on board, Cooper told Mucklow to inform the captain that he wanted to fly to Mexico City. They were to fly with the landing gear down, the flaps at 15 degrees and below 10,000 feet. The lights in the cabin were to be switched off, and the aft stairway, which opens from the underbelly of the fuselage, was to remain extended. 2 of Cooper's
Thanks,
demands
Resub
could
Nobly.
not be satisfied. First of all, the flight configuration he'd requested would not allow for a non-stop flight to Mexico City. As such, Cooper proposed a refueling stop in Phoenix, Yuma, or Sacramento before they all agreed on Reno, Nevada. Second of all, it was not possible
It
to
seems like they're
depart with
on
the ventral
Cooper's
staircase
side. Like, yeah, you can
extended.
take the money and
Cooper agreed
tell us
to
where to go.
retract the stairs on the condition that Mucklow remained by his side and taught him how to extend them once the plane was airborne. Parked for nearly 2 hours due to complications with refueling, Flight 305 was back in the air by 7:36 p.m. Less than 5 minutes after takeoff, Cooper told Mucklow to head for the cockpit and that from this point onwards, he was not to be disturbed. The last time she
The
saw
bomb
Cooper,
turned out to be
he was
fake, though.
standing
Oh,
in the
sorry,
middle
don't
of
mean to
the
spoil
aisle
things.
as if though he was preparing to jump. Mucklow joined the rest of the crew, locked the cockpit door behind her, and some 3 hours later, Flight 305 safely landed in Reno. Once the flight
Sorry.
came to a stop, the crew
I could be
carefully
wrong, I
ventured
don't
into
really
the rear of
remember
the
that.
cabin, but there was no sign of Cooper nor the bomb. The aft stairway had been extended mid-flight and was slightly damaged upon landing. It seemed there was only one explanation for the hijacker's absence. At some point between Seattle and Reno, Cooper had strapped on a parachute, walked down the stairs, and leaped into the dark of night.
Thanks, resub beat on. I'm not sure, Bear.
As soon as it became clear that Cooper was no longer on board, dozens of FBI agents converged upon the aircraft, only to discover a disappointing amount of physical evidence. A black clip-on tie, 8 cigarette butts, and 2 of the 4 parachutes were all that Cooper left behind. Evidently, he'd brought the ransom and briefcase along with him. In interviews conducted on the night of the hijacking, Cooper was described by the crew and passengers as a white male with brown eyes and dark hair. He appeared to be in his mid-40s and wore a dark trench coat, a dark suit, a white shirt, a black tie, and dark shoes. Soon after boarding, he'd also donned a pair of sunglasses. Based on this description, the FBI produced the first of several composite sketches. Before they could mount a search, however, the FBI had to figure out when Cooper abandoned ship. But that was easier said than done. None of the 4 crew members witnessed Cooper jumping from the plane, nor did the pilots of 2 fighter jets which escorted the flight between Seattle and Reno, which is not all too surprising given it was the middle of the night. Although the flight crew did report something odd, the last communication with the hijacker occurred at approximately 8:05 p.m. when the crew used the intercom to offer assistance, which Cooper declined. Within the next 10 minutes, the crew experienced what they described as an oscillation or vibration of the aircraft. At the time, the crew suspected it might have been produced by Cooper's jump, and a subsequent recreation of the hijacking supported that conclusion. Okay, so that took care of the when, but what about the where? While Cooper was very explicit about the flight's configuration and destination, he never specified any kind of route. In fact, Cooper grew so impatient with the slow refueling in Seattle that he dismissed the captain's request to file a flight plan and simply told him to, quote, get the show on the road. As such, the captain chose to fly along an airway known as Victor 23 without any input from Cooper. By using Victor 23 as a guide, authorities estimated the most probable location of the flight at the approximated time of the jump was about 40 kilometers north of Portland. And so, at the break of dawn, the FBI mounted an impressive search operation using helicopters, airplanes, and ground troops. The problem was, even if the estimated bailout point was accurate, Cooper's eventual landing or drop zone was far more difficult to pinpoint. The loosely defined
it's so
search
cool!
area covered
This
a
guy's like an
vast stretch
actual
of mountainous
Galaxy Brain
wilderness
anime
overloaded
villain.
by a dense forest, so it was truly like finding a needle in a haystack. Apart from the difficult terrain, the search was further complicated by low temperatures and inclement weather, which persisted for days. Despite their best efforts, authorities never managed to find a single trace of Cooper, nor the items he'd brought along with him. Having made little to no progress by early December, the FBI turned their attention to the $200,000 ransom. The money had been collected from the Seattle First National Bank, which maintained a ransom package of $250,000 just for such an occasion. Because of this, the serial numbers of the $10,020 banknotes given to Cooper had been documented in advance, a complete list of which were quickly made available to financial institutions, government agencies, and the general public. The intention was to make it as difficult as possible for Cooper to spend his money. Northwest Airlines and several newspapers even began to offer rewards to anyone who could find a note with a matching serial number. In spite of these efforts, no one ever did. That is until nearly a decade later. In early 1980, a young boy named Brian Ingram was building a campfire on a small beach in southern Washington. As he was digging into the sand, Ingram discovered 3 bundles of cash totaling $5,880. Having heard about the infamous skyjacking, Ingram's parents brought the severely degraded bundles to the FBI. The notes were promptly inspected, and sure enough, the serial numbers matched those of the ransom.
Fuck! Big fine, Brian. Imagine being like an 8-year-old, fucking drinking milk, shitting in your diapers, and finding that.
Than it answered. The most significant of which was how? How did the money end up so far away from the drop zone? Looking at this map, it might be tempting to think that Cooper simply dropped some of the money, which then fell into the Lewis River. The bundles could then have been carried further downstream by the Columbia
Thanks to
River
the resub Crones
before
and the gift
finally
sub
being
PG.
washed ashore at Tina Bar, which is the name of the beach. Tina Mucklow, Tina Bar. Coincidence? Yeah, coincidence. Anyway, the problem with this idea is that the Columbia River flows in the opposite direction. This has led some, including members of the FBI, to re-evaluate the initial drop zone assessment. For instance, if the drop zone was much further southeast, close to a river called the Washougal River, it is conceivable, albeit improbable, that the money floated all the way down to Tina Bar. Alternatively, the bundles may have simply landed on the beach if the flight path was further to the west. Even so, natural explanations struggle to explain how three independent, potentially free-falling and/or free-floating bundles of cash ended up at the exact same place on the same beach. To complicate matters, sediment from the riverbed was excavated and dumped onto Tina Bar as part of a dredging operation in 1974. And according to one analysis, the money was discovered above this layer of sediment. If true, that would mean the money came to rest at Tina Bar sometime after 1974.
What the
But
fuck?
a re-examination of that analysis found that what was believed to be a layer of deposited sediment might actually have been a perfectly natural layer of clay. Not only that, but the sediment was clearly dumped some distance away from where the money was discovered. Furthermore, when Ingram discovered the bundles, the rubber bands which held them together were still intact. This is significant because experiments conducted in 2009 revealed that this brand of rubber bands could not withstand exposure to open air or water for more than a year. So, unless the bundles were somehow protected from the elements, they must have become buried at Tina Bar within a year of the hijacking. The
This is
most
so
probable
fucking
explanation
complicated.
seems to be that Cooper or someone else deliberately buried the money. Did Cooper survive and bury the money himself? Did someone else bury the money after stumbling upon Cooper's remains?
If you're in the chat,
If
DB
there
Cooper,
is an
just let me know,
explanation
man.
which
This
does
is
not
crazy.
require human
I want to hear
intervention,
more about it.
It's managed to elude investigators for decades. Suffice it to say,
I
this is
didn't
a
know any of
mystery
this part.
within a mystery. Since Ingram's discovery in 1980, both Tina Bar and the grounds around the Washougal
Here's Prime
River have
Zex.
been subjected to numerous searches.
I have not seen that,
But
nobly.
to date, there's been no sign of Cooper, nor the rest of the money.
You know, if Cooper was as smart as we think he is, he would have done all of this while having a full beard, and then when he jumped, he would have shaved the beard off. Just
From
to
the
add
very
another
beginning, it was
layer of
assumed by many
good
that
ideas
Cooper
to
did
it.
not survive his daring escape. It would not make for a very thrilling conclusion to this story, but that's the thing about stories, they're usually far more exciting than reality. While there is no hard evidence for nor against Cooper's survival, the assumption that he fell to his death is not without merit. When Cooper leaped into the darkness, Flight 305 was plowing through a frigid rainstorm at roughly 170 knots, 10,000
no.
feet above Southern
Oh
Washington.
no!
The wind was so violent that it ripped out a placard from the aft stairway.
Oh, Jesus
which was
Christ.
later
He just
recovered in
fucking got
1978,
blasted.
almost directly below the estimated flight path. To say that Cooper was not dressed for the occasion would be an understatement. The ground beneath him, meanwhile, was obscured by multiple layers of clouds, which likely means that Cooper jumped without knowing his precise location. Even if he could see the ground and had a specific drop zone in mind, the parachute he selected was non-steerable, meaning he would not have been able to steer his descent towards a specific landing spot, thus precluding any potential coordination with an accomplice
So many
stationed on
problems.
the ground.
He also
While
forgot to
Cooper
account for the
expressed
dragons
some
that hover over
familiarity with
Portland, Oregon.
parachutes, his actual competence level is up for debate.
And also, on
It's
that
widely
night, there was a
believed that
javelin
Cooper
tossing
demanded
competition.
2 pairs of parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserve, to make the authorities believe that he intended to take a hostage. That is precisely what happened, as the FBI contemplated, but eventually decided against sabotaging the chutes, as they did not want to risk the life of an innocent civilian. But in their haste to obtain them, they unintentionally provided Cooper with a non-functional dummy chute intended for training purposes. This mishap seems to have gone unnoticed by Cooper because that dummy chute was one of the 2 missing from the plane. Not only that, but Cooper chose the older and technically inferior parachute out of the 2 primary chutes provided.
Nice.
So in both cases, it seems like Cooper made the worst possible choice. But there
Thanks to resub
are
AJ,
other ways
Absolver,
to
and the
interpret
gift
this
sub Banana.
information. For instance, it's possible that
Thanks,
Cooper
Cooper,
used the
the resub
dummy
canned.
chute not as a reserve, but as a means to secure the bag of money. In fact, that is precisely what Cooper tried to do with the functional reserve chute. First, he tried to place the money in the chute's canopy before removing some of the suspension lines and wrap them around the bag. Perhaps he used the dummy chute for a similar purpose. And Cooper's decision to use the older primary chute is not necessarily an indication of inexperience. It could also be a sign of familiarity, because the chute he left behind was a civilian luxury chute, while the one he used was a military chute. The argument is that Cooper might have been trained as, say, a paratrooper, and chose the older military chute because that's the one with which he was most familiar.
I'm starting to doubt it.
One other
I don't think
to
so.
suspect that Cooper had a military
You could have
background.
given him a giant
When the
pair
flight
of
was in a
pants and he
holding
probably would have
pattern in
jumped off
Seattle,
holding them.
Cooper mentioned that the
I think he's
McCord
dumb as
Air
fuck
Force
now.
Base was only 20 minutes away from the Seattle-Tacoma airport. At the time, that was an accurate assessment and might suggest a military background. Apart from the potential military connections, Cooper may even have had links to the Central Intelligence Agency.
I doubt
You
it.
see, the type of aircraft which
He was
Cooper
probably
chose
like
to
a Redditor
hijack,
before
a
Reddit
Boeing
existed.
727, was also used by the CIA to covertly drop agents and supplies during the Vietnam War. A task for which the Boeing 727 was uniquely qualified due to its distinctive aft stairway. So it's fairly safe to assume that Cooper chose to hijack a Boeing 727 specifically because it provided a relatively safe means of escape. Whether he learned of this from the CIA or came to that conclusion
Thanks, DBC.
independently is another
Sub
question.
Sugar Daddy.
However, the fact that Cooper chose to hijack a flight operated by Northwest Airlines was apparently random chance. When Tina Mucklow asked Cooper about his motives, he responded, "It's not because I have a grudge towards your airline, it's just because I have a grudge."
Oh, that's
He
kind of
further
fucking
clarified
cool.
that Flight 305
Woo!
just happened to be in the right place at the
You're
right
not trapped
time.
in here with me.
Even so,
I'm trapped
it's
in here
clear
with
that
frigid
Cooper
weather
came
temperatures and a
prepared.
bad plan.
He seemed to know a great deal about aircraft and aviation. He appeared to be familiar with the local terrain. He maintained a low profile to avoid a panic. He covered his eyes with a pair of glasses to conceal his identity. He left very little evidence behind, and he demanded 4 parachutes to force the assumption that he was taking a hostage. He was even cunning enough to reclaim the note which he'd initially given to Florence Schaffner. Apart from the name he wrote on his plane ticket, there are no other samples of Cooper's handwriting. But for all his planning and cunning, it seems Cooper did not give enough thought to his eventual escape. Not
Yeah, the
only
most
did he
important
fail to
part.
specify a route, but he was forced to
I
make
did
a
it.
last-minute destination
Now I'll just
change
kill
from
myself
Mexico
out here, I
City
guess.
to Reno. He could have demanded more appropriate parachuting equipment like a pair of boots, a helmet, or jumpsuit. He could even have specified the ransom to be delivered in larger denominations to make it lighter and less cumbersome to carry.
Exit Tier 1,
Assuming
Joe.
he did survive the fall and made it safely to the ground, he may then have had to make his way through a dense, partially snow-covered forest in nothing but loafers and a trench coat in late November. I get the distinct impression that Cooper's escape was much more of a leap of faith than a carefully executed jump. On the other hand, authorities never received a
I love
missing
the
persons
animation
report
he
in
has here
matching
with
the
it too. He
description
looks
of
like he's
Cooper
really fucking
in the
struggling
wake of the
falling out.
hijacking. This might suggest that Cooper did survive, and that he swiftly and quietly resumed his normal routine. Furthermore, other hijackers have performed similar stunts, and many of them did survive, even if they were quickly apprehended. Finally, the simplest explanation for how 3 bundles of cash ended up at Tina Bar is human intervention. At the end of the day, most of this is based on nothing but supposition. Without any concrete evidence of Cooper's demise, it leaves the door wide open to the far more exciting proposition that he did, in fact, survive.
Nah, I've now been convinced that he's a fucking idiot. There's no chance. This man
By
dove
time
off in the middle of the
press got
night
wind of the hijacking,
in the
FBI
worst
had
possible
already
conditions. He
begun
should
to
have. It's
investigate
like he jumped into a
potential
volcano.
suspects. Among them was
He would have had a higher
man
chance of
reportedly
surviving
with
that.
Initials DB and surname Cooper. This Cooper was quickly eliminated as a suspect, but due to a mix-up by the press, the name Dan Cooper was confused for DB Cooper, and the rest is history. While Dan Cooper is most likely a pseudonym, there is a comic book series of the same name. The comic is written in French and centers around a Canadian pilot named Dan Cooper. While the comic was not translated into English nor sold in the United States before 1971, it was available in Canada, which has a large French-speaking population. Given that American and Canadian accents can be difficult to
Exit Tier 1,
distinguish,
MD Wall.
it's possible that Cooper, who was described as having no discernible accent, was a bilingual Canadian. This might even be supported by something that Cooper might have said. You see, when the captain relayed Cooper's demands to air traffic control, he used the phrase negotiable American currency. It seems doubtful that an American citizen would specify American currency, so perhaps Cooper was not American. The problem is, we don't know if this is a direct quote from Cooper or paraphrasing by the captain. For instance, notes taken by the crew during the hijacking merely contain the phrase negotiable currency, while testimonies provided by the crew after the hijacking include phrases like $200,000 in cash and circulated US currency. So, Cooper might have been Canadian. And
I think Cooper might have been an alien.
Dan Cooper
At this point, he could be anything,
anyone.
anyone. We could all be DB
Might have
Cooper.
taken his name from something or someone else. Nearly half a century has gone by since the hijacking took place, and in that time, thousands of suspects have been questioned and investigated. It would obviously be impossible to cover all of them here, but let's take a look at some of the people that at some point or another have been suspected of being DB Cooper.
It's just a picture of my dad. This man loves working on old cars.
First became a suspect.
He's never
in
parachuted, but we thought it was worth
and on
checking
the
out
surface,
anyway.
He seems like a solid candidate. He was a decorated Army paratrooper and helicopter pilot. He had experience with explosives. He had an extensive criminal record. He had an uncle named John Cooper who was an avid skydiver.
Whoa.
He was expelled from the army only months before the hijacking,
Whoa.
which might suggest a motive. After all, the hijacker did say he had a grudge. When confronted by journalists and private investigators, Rackstraw would neither confirm nor outright deny that he was DB Cooper.
It's him
Instead,
then.
he'd say things like, "I could have been," or "I would not discount myself."
Actually,
On the other hand, Rackstraw had light-colored eyes, which
and
Cooper
thanks,
did
Cooper,
not.
again.
More significantly, Rackstraw was only 28 years of age at the time of the hijacking. This is well outside the range of ages reported by the crew and passengers, most of whom believed Cooper was in his mid-40s. Kenneth Christensen first became a suspect
Thanks,
in
370 for
2003
speed.
when his brother noticed certain parallels between him and Cooper. Christensen had briefly served as a paratrooper in World War II, and since 1953 he'd worked for Northwest Airlines as both a mechanic and a flight attendant. He was 45 years old at the time of the hijacking. He was left-handed, which Cooper might have been. For instance, Cooper used his left hand to interact with his briefcase, and the clip-on
Thanks for
tie
5
he
gift
left
subs,
on board
Movia.
was affixed with a tie clasp applied from the left. Shortly before he died in
Larissa
1994, Christensen had supposedly told his brother, "There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you." After his passing, his family discovered over $200,000 in his bank accounts. To top it all off, Florence Schaffner stated that photographs of Christensen bore a strong resemblance to Cooper.
Why don't
On
you check the
other
serial
hand,
numbers on that
Christensen
money?
did not match the physical description of Cooper. He was both shorter and lighter. While Schaffner did see a strong resemblance, she remarked that Cooper had more hair, and that is supported by the composite sketches. And there was nothing suspicious about the large sums of money which he simply earned by selling land.
This is the
Richard
70s, it wasn't
McCoy
digital,
first
I'm sure he
became
had
a
it
suspect
physical.
in 1972 when he hijacked a Boeing 727 and escaped via the aft stairway, much like DB Cooper. Because of the significant overlap between the two hijackings, some believe they must have been committed by the same person. McCoy used a fake name, he used a fake hand grenade to threaten the crew, he used handwritten notes to issue his demands. Both McCoy and Cooper used the phrase "no funny stuff" as a warning to the crew. McCoy demanded $500,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. McCoy also
What the
bailed out the
fuck?
back of the plane once they passed over his hometown in the state of Utah. Apart from the
What the
similar
fuck?
modus operandi, McCoy had also served in the Vietnam War as a demolitions expert and a helicopter pilot. McCoy did actually survive the fall and managed to evade authorities for 2 full days before he was apprehended and sentenced to 45 years in prison. Before his death in 1974, McCoy refused to confirm or deny that he was DB Cooper. On the other hand, McCoy was an avid recreational skydiver and even came prepared with a skydiving helmet and jumpsuit. He gave very specific
Thanks to Tier 1
instructions about the
stubs.
flight
We
path.
give sub
In
King
addition to the
also.
fake hand grenade, McCoy also used an unloaded handgun to threaten the crew. He failed to retrieve one of the notes he'd given to a flight attendant. He was only 29 years of age at the time of the hijacking, and all 3 flight attendants were quite certain that McCoy was not Cooper. While there are meaningful parallels between these two
That's a
cases,
lot of
McCoy might
parallels.
simply have been a copycat who'd read about DB Cooper in the news.
That is a lot of fucking parallels, though. Holy shit.
Dwayne Weber first became a suspect in 1995 when, shortly before his death, he supposedly told his wife, "I've got a secret to tell you. I am Dan Cooper." Following his deathbed confession, Weber's widow recalled a number of fascinating details.
Actually, gives some
She claims to have
DB
found a
Cooper
bag
himself.
tag resembling the one used in the hijacking. She claims Weber had sustained a knee injury after jumping out of a plane. Weber supposedly had a nightmare about leaving his fingerprints on the aft stairs. And a year before the money was discovered at Tina Bar, Weber had allegedly paid a quick visit to the same location. In addition, Weber was a World War II veteran, he had an extensive criminal record, he matched the physical description, and he was 47 years old in 1971. On the other hand, Weber's fingerprints did not match any of the prints collected from Flight 305. Although, to be fair, there's no way to know if any of those prints actually belonged to Cooper. Furthermore, Weber's DNA did not match a DNA sample collected from the tie clasp. But once again, there's no way to know if the DNA on the tie clasp actually came from the hijacker and not someone else. What's so frustrating is that the FBI likely had a much better source of DNA at one point. If you recall, 8 cigarette butts were collected from the scene, and there's
I
a good
forgot
chance
about
they
that.
were all suffused with Cooper's DNA. The problem is, that evidence was lost at some point, and has not turned up since.
How? What do you do? Shove him up his butthole before jumping off? How did...
William Smith first
How?
became a suspect in 2018. Smith served in the Navy
I
during
totally
World
forgot
War
about
II
that.
and likely had
Well,
some
they probably did
experience
too.
with parachuting. He was 43 years old at the time of the hijacking. He had dark brown eyes. He matched the physical description. He shared a certain likeness with the composite sketches, especially this speculative sketch of an older D.B. Cooper. A student named
That's
Ira
definitely a
Daniel
drawing
Cooper,
from his
who was
grandson or
killed in World War
something.
II, attended the same high school.
That
as
is
Smith.
just that man.
Smith worked as a
Drawn by his
yardmaster
son.
for a railroad company for most of his life, but in 1970 the company filed for bankruptcy. As a consequence, Smith lost his pension, which might suggest a motive. He could, for instance, have developed a grudge towards the airline industry for their role in bringing about the downfall of the rail transportation industry. It's further speculated that Smith could have used his knowledge of railroad networks to hop on a train and escape undetected. On the other hand, Smith spent his entire life in the northeastern United States, given that the hijacking occurred on the other
Needs to
side
give
of
some
the
King
country
Oso.
and was committed by someone who at least appeared to be familiar
I
with
guess
the local
Colt, yeah.
terrain. Smith is not the most ideal candidate. However, the fact that Smith worked as a yardmaster is interesting. You see, the tie that Cooper left behind was recently examined using an electron microscope, which uncovered various metallic particles. Some of these particles, especially pure titanium, were quite rare in 1971. This might suggest that Cooper worked as a manager at some sort of chemical or metallurgical facility, or possibly a rail yard.
I think it's him! The old man!
If nothing else, I hope this limited selection of suspects illustrates just how difficult it is to be certain when you have so little evidence to work
Yeah,
with.
that was fucking fascinating.
These 5 individuals look nothing alike, yet any one of them could be D.B. Cooper. Was Cooper really in his mid-40s, or did he simply look old for his age? Did Cooper really serve in the military?
Yeah, what if they
Which
all
of
did it?
these
There was
sketches
5
most
Coopers that kept
closely
switching
resemble
out.
Cooper? In 2016, the FBI had to admit defeat and officially close down the case. Unless someone stumbles upon Cooper's remains or manages to track down the rest of the money, it seems there is little hope of resolution. Did Cooper survive? I have no idea.
No, he
But as
didn't.
long
No
as that
chance.
possibility cannot be dismissed, the legend of D.B. Cooper will no doubt persist.
Thanks the Prime, Gaben. In my professional opinion, I think there's no fucking chance after hearing all of the conditions he would have had to go through to survive, that he actually survived. I think what could have fucking happened is he jumped out of the plane and just got split in half and gored by just awful temperatures. He probably went through like a fucking swarm of locusts too with everything he was saying was going on at the time. I think there's no chance that man fucking tapped down on the ground. He fucking died at mid-flight. I had no idea the conditions were that bad when he made the jump. I didn't know half of this shit, actually. I only knew the general overview. Exit Prime Blammo. What a great watch. I can't believe I haven't seen that one. I know what Chubby Emu is. Fuck, is there any new DB Cooper info now? Now I'm so glued. We have so much technology now, we should be able to recreate the entire history of that tie that DB Cooper left behind. We should be able to take that tie, put it in my fucking hard drive, and be able to see the entire manufacturing process and who owned the tie all the way up until it was on the plane. He's the Prime Nar and the Tier 1 Swebs. I don't even know what that means, James. I'm not caught up on the drama on that one. Let's see. DB Cooper. RP is DB Cooper. Yeah, that'll be my new character in GTA RP. What is the newest development here? This video was in 2020, so do we have any startling new intel in 2021? Shit. Shit. Doesn't look like it. What a fascinating story. Is there any others like that? DB Cooper, flight attendant Tina Mucklow as the key to mysterious skyjacking, but does her story hold the answers? Cicada 3011's not terrible. And it's not 3011, isn't it? 3301? Yeah, it's 3301.
I'm built differently. I'm built